The chassis isn't too big. I actually thought it'd be a bit bigger than that, so that's good. The best part is these have a nice Phillips tube in them. Now I was going to bin this NEC TV, but I read up and found these tubes are actually meant to be really good for arcade use, so I kept hold of it, and lucky I did, because that turned up and now it's got a home. The next step is to pull this front section off so that I can somehow prop up the monitor and frame in the cab, and then try and figure out how I'm going to make some brackets to hold it all in place. So I've separated the two sections. There's a fit number of screws around the base and around the sides, and it's opened right up to just a shell like that. I'm actually really happy. That's going to make life extremely easy. Now I've got to try and prop the monitor up in there, get it to line up with the bezel, then figure out some form of bracketry. And look, lovely. They even pulled the speakers. I mean, wouldn't you leave the speakers in the cab and just wire them up? Who knows? I might just make some brackets up to use the ones that are in the TV. They're a bit bigger, but with all the doofing. They're a little bit too big for the... a little bit too big, but I'll just make brackets up or bend those tabs down. Next, I'm going to attach the frame to this old Toshiba monitor. I've been using the scissor lift and propping the monitor in various places to get it right, but long story short, the brackets pretty much have to be straight off here with this hole parallel with that hole, with the whole lot coming forwards towards me about 15mm. Similar down the bottom, has to be in line with the bottom hole though, and it has to come forwards about 55 to 60mm. So I'm going to try and make some brackets up now. Got some sheet metal left over from an old printer that I pulled to pieces. I might cut that up and give it a go. Alright, so I've managed to craft some ghetto brackets out of that scrap metal. Should work alright. So I've bolted the top brackets up now. They're fitting alright. I still need to weld these bolts in so they're studs, so I've got something to hook the monitor on when lifting in and out. Okay, here's the bottom brackets done. They're a fair bit different to what Sega had. I think they had this bend over further. So because of that I've got to notch that out to clear the frame, but I'm sure it'll be fine. If it flexes I might put a brace in, but don't reckon I'll need it. Alright, all the brackets are screwed in. Now I'm going to go for the test fit. Make some braces to go across here and then juggle around some tubes. Right, I'm getting a lot closer. Got the screen mounted in there, got the top sort of on, but there are a number of problems. First one is this big gap. So there's about 10mm, so I should be able to fix that with some spacers. The next problem is I've warped the cabinet out. Here's hitting the back of the cabinet. I think is causing the cabinet to foul and twist. So the brackets I made for the bottom, they were too narrow because the actual bolt spacing between the top and the bottom is actually different. It's another 10mm out each side, as well as being 20mm further towards me than I expected. So I had to mend up some more brackets. So I'll have to cut those and fit them. So I finally got the brackets right. It actually fits. There's probably like a millimetre gap between the bezel and the screen, but it's not really worth worrying about. And can always put a washer or so in there to bring it up. But yeah, it's done. Just need to add some reinforcing. I'll weld a piece of RHS in to hold them together. In the bottom, I have to do the same, but it has to come down and around a bit. So that's the first side welded. and tack the nuts on 3 sides, or the bolts I should say, then just a few more tacks around the sheet metal. It doesn't really need a lot to hold it on there, so it'll be strong enough. It's only 2mm thick. So I've slapped the bottom reinforcing brace together, added a bit of RHS like I said, just tacked it in a few spots. I'll pull that off now and then weld some bolts in it like I did on the top. Right, so I got the brackets painted last night. I've got a bit of polycarbonate here, some space for some standoffs at the front. Right, so I've just used some arcade standoffs, a little bit of flex, but I might put something in the middle, stop it bouncing around so much. Got the chassis mounted on the back plane. I've clamped the back plane to the frame. Flyback's a little bit close to the tube there, but it's going to have to do. Just going to drill some holes straight through and use some self-tappers to hold that in place. So I've got the chassis mounted in place now. I've run into a couple of little problems though. One of them is that I can't get the neck board on because there's not enough space. Fortunately there is enough space for it to fit. I just need to remove the back plate to do so. Also I had to remove the degaussing coil. Alright, so I fired it up, got it going, showing snow anyway. Okay, so after a whole heap of mucking around, doing some rewiring on the chassis, figuring out that I needed to install that subboard to get the composite input to work, to get some sync, then hooking up the Mega Drive, I now have the display going. I just wanted to do a bit of an overview of what I've done to this chassis to make it work. First of all, I patched a DB15 connector into the RGB inputs of what's called the Jungle IC. They normally are fed from this chip here, which provides the on-screen display to show you like the volume bars and the menu system. Now, for that to come on, it actually controls a pin called fast blanking pin, which has to be at a certain voltage to choose which inputs the jungle chip displays on the actual tube. So I've got a resistor divider here, and I've just pulled it to the right voltage so that the OSD is basically always on. Now normally, well, the old way of doing that was to use a switch and then switch these RGB lines between the RGB controller and the RGB input. But another trick which I went over was to use, there's some series resistors in there, I think they're 360 ohms, and then change the original series resistors that come out of the OSD chip. I think I went from 4.7k down to 2.7k, and then that worked great. So that's good. So that's got it basically being like a VGA monitor that only does 15 kilohertz. The other change I had to make was there was this front panel that had the AV in on the front panel. I had to short those two pins together because they actually detected whether something was plugged into the front panel or not. So when that's connected, there's okay, nothing in front panel. Use the back connector because the horizontal sync or the competent sync is derived from the incoming signal from the yellow AV here, which is hooked up to the middle bottom pin of the DB15. Okay, and then the final mod that I've done is just to hook the speakers up to some terminals here so that I can run those up in the cabinet. It's got some nice 5-watt analog ICs here, so that's going to be quite powerful for the speakers in it. And of course I'll just use these speakers in the cab because someone had completely gutted what was there. I'll make some polymorph plastic adapters up and screw those in there, then run some longer leads down here. Right, getting a lot closer now. This is all back together. Haven't put this back plate back on here, but I don't think it's really necessary. I think it was needed more on the Excelina for the built-in cabinet sort of rotation helper. I have to put this frame back into the cab and then lift the monitor into that without falling over and breaking anything, then try and get it test wired up. Then maybe do a bit more alignment, set up a Raspberry Pi or PC, make a decision on that. I think it's going to be Raspberry Pi. It's a new distro out, or not a new distro, but a distro I haven't seen before. I'm going to give it a go. Alright, let's get to it.